All right, everybody. Jim Wilcox.
So as Charlie said, I'm an investigator for the KBRO, but I'm just like every single one of you all. I'm just somebody out there looking for some answers, right? So who here, with a show of hands, has heard of the Yeti or the abominable snowman? Okay, everybody look around. Majority of you, with hands still up, okay? How many of you feel like you have a good grasp of the history along with the abominable snowman or Yeti? Look at what's left. so these are the types of presentations I like to do. If anybody's seen some that I've done, I don't do them very often. But I like to take these stories that we understand a little bit about or know a little bit with our community and stuff and dig a little bit deeper and try to share the reasons why they're involved in our community and in our mindset. With this one, I had a hard time because I'm a very analytical person. As some of you all may know, keep your skepticals on. And in the West philosophy, we always want to know left or right, right or wrong, black or white. But this story takes place in the East. And in the East, things kind of just are sometimes. There isn't an explanation. And that is where you have these two worlds that collide. And you can't wrap everything in a perfect bow. See, the story of the Yeti has one foot in science and ecology, and it has the other foot in mythology and religion. And I cannot really fathom how to present that in a way that makes sense to us in the West fully. But I'm going to do my best. So, long before Bigfoot was a household name, there was the Yeti, an abominable snowman and towering legendary creature believed to roam the snow-capped peaks of the Himalayas. For centuries, witnesses have claimed run-ins with the infamous beast, but without conclusive evidence, the answer remains, is the Yeti fact or folklore? So that's why my presentation is called Search for the Himalayan Snowman, Yeti Remains a Mystery. And for those, yes, he does have Bigfoot dad jokes. Yeti remains a mystery. So this place, like I said, most of it's going to take place in the east. So our setting is the Himalayan range. The majority of that would be here roughly 230,000 square miles. The mountain range itself is about 1,500 miles. This includes some of the highest peaks in our world, including the infamous Mount Everest that sits at about 29,000 feet. This area coincides with a lot of different countries. India, Nepal, China, you can even see up here, Afghanistan. It covers a lot of religions. It's very multicultural. And in the majority of the people, though, that inhabit this place would probably be centered in Nepal, and they are known as the Sherpa. There are about roughly 20 clans of Sherpa, and they all have their own a little bit variances and religions, and they're very multicultural. But the Yeti influence has been within the Sherpa culture for well over 500 years. The majority of my presentation will take place during the mid-20th century. That would be somewhere around 1950, 1970 roughly. And it will be focused more on the Western influence. There are a lot of countries involved and a lot of people with this story. Countries like China, India, Japan, US, European countries. I could be here all night talking about all of these. So that's why I've focused it more into the Western, because I feel like that is the one that we can grasp the best. So the description of the Yeti ranges a little bit. However, most of us probably have this picture in our minds. A creature that stands somewhere between 5 to 9 feet tall, roughly 400 to 900 pounds, a pointed head or conical head, hairless face, normally described as being orange, reddish, darker in color, sometimes grayish, and they're more heard than seen, mostly with a high-pitched wail or whistle or a type of scream. And their diet would consist of small rodents, amphibians, roots, berries, plants that are within the region. However, there's another bit to the story, and that the Yeti has been known in certain areas to walk backwards, or that it has its feet facing the opposite direction as ours. And the reason for that is that it would make it harder to track it. Also, it may not leave any footprints at all. And it has the ability to turn invisible. The Yeti is a creature that goes by 1,000 names, pretty much. But you can see some of them I've listed here. Mete, Migo, Meche, Midre, Metokangmi, Kang, Madi, Yeti, or Abominable Snowman as we know it. You can see here a couple of different versions of the Yeti. You can see here maybe more of a monkey type, more of a bear type, more of a man-bear type. Notice the giant claws compared to this one. So we start our story more with reports, like I said, out of the West. But the Sherpa people have their legends for generations. And there are so many fascinating stories that go with the Sherpa, from anything from people that have come in on Yetis inside their own homes. There was one story I read of a lady that had left her kind of yurt type of tent, and when she came back, she heard her child crying. There was a female Yeti above trying to breastfeed the child, I assume to quiet it or that it needed something. She freaked out, it freaked out, ran away. There's even one where someone describes shooting one in the foot, and it screamed and yelled in pain and hobbled off on 2 legs. So there's so many stories, and I can't go into all of them. But the main one I'm going to look at is Charles Howard Bury. Now this took place in 1921 at about 21,000 feet. He's a British expedition trying to conquer Everest. And him and 5 other people see this dark humanoid figure on a cliff walking away from them. Now, he describes it as walking upright and dark, but yet when they go to look at the footprints, he assumes that it's more of a gray wolf or something like that. But his guides tell him, no, it's Meto Kangmi. And when you break that down, it basically means Meto, man-bear, or Kangmi, from the snow. And you will see a lot of the descriptions of the Yeti and the names for the Yeti. A lot of them have the word man in it. And I think that says a lot about like kind of how they see this thing as more man-like than bear-like or beast-like. But they told him it's the Meto Kangmi. He somewhat disagrees, but he does say it's unusual, that he had never seen anything like it. Now, a journalist by the name of Henry Newman in Calcutta in the 1920s catches wind of this story. When he goes to write, he misinterprets the word meto, and he uses the word mech. And mech means filthy or dirty. So now he's translating it as filthy or dirty snowman. Taking some journalistic creativity, he decides, I don't like that. He writes it as the abominable snowman. And needless to say, that stuck. So the cryptozoologist Ivan Sanderson, which I'm sure some of you all know, he describes the impact of using the words abominable snowman as like an explosion of an atomic bomb. It immediately captured the imagination of school kids and armchair explorers all over Europe and America. Like Charles had mentioned, and I had talked to Ron, that triggered something. There's a man by the name, as you can see, quite a bit further on in the story, named Don Willis. So Don was a British mountaineer who was a fervent believer of the Yeti and claims he encountered the Yeti while scaling the mountains in 1970. He observed a few human-like footprints in the snow around his camp one morning that evening and claimed through his binoculars he watched a bipedal, ape-like creature for about 20 minutes as it appeared to search for food not far from his camp.
Was this still on Everest?
It's around Everest, yes. In a different valley, but similar location. Yes. So this is probably the main classic photo that I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. So for 30 years, people had tried to find a route to the top of Everest. They had tried to approach it from one side, and then they decided that's too difficult, and a small crew of very brave men, I would like to add, tried to find a different route on the other side of the mountain. For 30 years they searched to try to find this better route. And on November 8th, 1951, late in the afternoon, gentlemen by the name Eric Shipton and Dr. Michael Ward and Tenzing Norgay, and these are all critical people that'll come up later again, were traveling along the glacier Menglung Basin at about 16,000 to 17,000 feet. They came across a trackway where the prints measured about 12 inches long and 5 inches wide. During that day, they were able to capture 4 photographs of the incident. There's a picture of Shipton looking as a proper gentleman should up in the Alps. And he had described the prints as maybe only being 24 hours old, so very new. They were able to follow this trackway for about 100 yards. So I'm going to point this out a little bit. So these are this is the main photo that everybody's probably seen, the ice pick. This is Dr. Ward's ice pick next to it as a scale item. You can see Dr. Ward's foot there, and that's kind of coming through pretty good, but you can kind of see the print maybe in this one a little bit better. Kind of a bigger toe, another toe, a few little series of toes there. So, and here's kind of a trackway picture too. It's probably a little hard to see it. And there's Dr. Ward standing there, and there's his little knapsack that they kind of had there. So because it was getting late in the evening, and no one wants to be at the base of Everest without a proper shelter, they did have to call off the search for that day. The rest of the team does arrive later on, and they follow the trackway a little bit further. They follow it for about a mile. At one point, they do say that the trackway, the creature itself had jumped across an ice crevasse. And on the opposite side of the crevasse, they could see where toes had dug in with nails or claws. To fast forward a little bit, and I'm going to come back just so I can knock this bullet point out, but in 2007, Christie's Auction House, which is out of England, did sell some of these photos for that price right there, $4,604. It was in British pounds, but I converted it for your all's convenience. But I would like to tell Dr. Ward's interpretation of the events that day, word for word, as he wrote them, even though I just gave you a little bit of an overview. In 1951, Tenzing, Shipton, and I descended from the Menglung Basin at about 16,000 to 17,000 feet. We came across a whole series of footprints in the snow on the lower part of the glacier. There seemed to be 2 groups, one rather indistinct in outline, leading on to the surrounding snowfields. The others were much more distinct, with in places markedly individual imprint etched into the 2 to 4 inch covering of snow. We had no means of measuring, so after examining them, Shipton took 4 photographs. 2 of the distinct prints with myself, and there's another one I think that does exist. My footprints and the rucksack beside them for comparison. The other 2 photographs were of one of the most detailed and distinct group of prints with my ice axe for scale, and a second one with my booted foot. The footprint was about the same length as my boot. I take a size 42 Continental, or 8.5 British, which is about 12 to 13 inches long. The print was nearly twice as broad as my boot, 3 to 4 inches, and had clear-cut edges in the crystalline snow on a base of firm snow ice. There was the definite imprint of a big toe that was broader and shorter. Back there. That one. Shorter than the other rather distinct toes, of which there seemed to be 4 or 5. We followed these tracks for some way down the icy glacier and noticed that whenever a narrow 6-inch wide crevasse was crossed, there seemed to be claw marks in the snow at the end of the toe imprints. 2 days later, we were joined by Murray and Bourdillon, that's the rest of their team. All tracks had been deformed by the sun and wind. There are another set of prints that does come up. So I'm going to fast forward just a little bit. In 1972, a biologist survey expedition in Upper Nepal, led by Ted Cronley and Jeff McNeely. You can see Cronley here casually taking some notes in the snow, as one would do. Came across a series of prints around their camp, and these prints, they could not determine exactly what they were, even being biologists. Here is a cast that they took of the prints, and you can kind of see an outline here and like a 3D model that Meldrum himself has tried to reproduce and try to give you an idea of what the foot would actually look like. So, there and back again, I do want to touch on this, that conquering Everest was seen as the ultimate physical challenge of its day. And on May 29th, 1953, Edmund Hillary and Sherpa Tenzing Norgay, who also was there for the Shipton photos, were the first to ever reach Everest and return. But now we're starting to get into a little bit of the peak Yeti hype, the Yeti mania, if you will, due to the Shipton photo. In 1953, the British Daily Mail launched their own expedition for the Yeti, which included about 300 men. They proceeded to try to track down other bits of evidence. You can see here a skull cap, and that'll come into play a little bit later. And they spent several weeks looking for the Yeti, but unfortunately they more or less came up empty-handed. They had some photograph of some mysterious prints, but most of their evidence was quickly dismissed. As I mentioned, this area is deep in Yeti lore, and I would like to touch on the country of Bhutan just for a little bit. In 1966, they ended up producing a series of stamps that portray the Yeti in about 5 different versions. I don't know if you can see that super well. There's kind of a white one, a female, kind of more of an angry looking one, kind of more of a lion or bear version, and then kind of this more ape-like version. They come in a series of colors. But in Bhutan, the Yeti itself is very precious to them. You can see some of the stamps there being used on a postcard too. But they also have a very serious trek between Bhutan and China, I believe, that is one of the more signature and one of the peak treks that you could ever take. But it is named after the Yeti. Also in Bhutan, they have a natural preserve called Bigfoot Valley, or Sekting Wildlife Sanctuary, that they've set across 253 square miles, and it is a reserve to protect wildlife, but also to protect the habitat of the Yeti. No great story is not told without the U.S. government involvement in it. So, as you can probably imagine, there's a lot of people now coming to this area to search for the Yeti. Nepal themselves in particular would like to set some ground rules for this, and the Foreign Service Dispatch of the U.S. Embassy in Kathmandu, Nepal, did this paperwork in 1959 to set the ground rules on if you want to be part of the U.S. expeditions to hunt for the Yeti. 3 rules that you had to follow. The first rule required that you pay 5,000 rupees to the Nepalese government, which comes out to a whopping $66 in today's, not adjusted for inflation, by the way, so who knows what that's actually going to be right now. The second, though, is basically if you were to encounter the creature, you must try to either take a photograph or take it alive, not to kill or injure the creature unless deemed absolutely necessary in self-defense. And you should turn over said evidence, physical evidence, to the government of Nepal at your earliest convenience. Third, and not last, any news or any other types of evidence that you do get of the abominable snowman must be cleared with the Nepalese government first, so they can probably take credit on your behalf a little bit. So here's where the hunt really picks up. In 1956, a Texas oil man, here's word of the Yeti. He goes by the name of Tom Slick. Very famous, also known for funding expeditions for Bigfoot as well. He had at one time 600 porters, just Sherpa people, lugging all their crap around, much less all. And what he decided to do was go at it a little bit differently, and he only brought along experts in zoology, biology, ecology, and he made it very scientific. Where previous expeditions were kind of some Joe Blows that had some money they wanted to burn and go look for a mythical beast in the Himalayas, but he was very professional. Unfortunately, during the first year of his expedition, while he's out there, he is injured in a bus accident. The bus's brakes did not work. He ended up jumping out of the bus, blowing his knees out, and you can actually see some bandages there. So he was not able to continue with the expedition. Overall, the expedition took 3 years, but during the second and third year, roughly, he hired 2 gentlemen called Peter and Brian, his brother, Byrne. And on his behalf, they set up to look for Yeti in 2 smaller crews. One group would investigate the mountains, and one group would look in the dense jungles for evidence. Tom Slick, I thought, was actually very successful, as that he was able to collect some footprints, some possible hair samples, fecal matter, and even an abandoned sleeping nest, as they described as woven together. Life magazine did offer him $25,000 if he could come up with a picture of the creature. That never happened. But you can kind of see one of the footprints there. This is kind of not a cast, but like the negative version of that, you know. So, along the way, though, there have been many stories of Yeti hands, Yeti scalps. I'm sure some of you have heard them, and they are vast. However, there are 2 in particular that we know a decent amount about and play a lot in the Western culture and history. Jing, I believe is the way that you would say this, monastery had a Yeti scalp. And you can see that here. Edmund Hillary, the man who did end up conquering Everest, after doing so, did decide that he was going to spend some time looking for the Yeti as well. And he spent about a year. Whenever he came across this scalp, he negotiated with the monastery and the people to bring the Yeti scalp back to England. They allowed him to do so. He did have to bring a representative that would keep an eye on the scalp, and he had to make a considerable donation to help build a local school, which he was happy to do. This Yeti scalp, they determined, came from a goat and antelope kind of hybrid there in the Himalayas called a sero. Actually, they even made a copy, trying to reproduce the scalp as much as possible, using a bit of dye, wrapping it around a wood form to kind of make it more conical, and they were able to come pretty darn close. That reproduction scalp sits in what's called the Explorers League in New York now, and you can see a picture of it there. After his time searching for the Yeti, he determined it's all fake. He did come across one in particular called the Pangboche hand. I'm sure you have all seen it if you've seen any documentary about the Yeti. Finding Bigfoot went here. Everybody goes checks out the hand. He determined by looking at the hand, he's like, it's fake. So this happened a little bit before, but the Pangboche hand in particular is very interesting. So even though Pangboche did have a scalp and a hand, you can kind of see more of a colorized original photo there of that original. We can say maybe we can write off the scalps, right? Goat, around a wood form. But in 1958, Peter Byrne was camping in the meadows below Pangboche, and he hears word about the scalp and the hand. And of course, since it's his job, he needs to go check it out. He comes across the hand. He feels very convinced that there's something to this. So back in that day, there was not exactly cell phones. There was no wire, telephone service or anything like that. So what Peter Byrne has to do, once he sees the hand, he sends someone with a hand letter to run all the way down the mountain to go send a telegraph to Tom Slick. That takes that individual, who is a Sherpa, by the way, 100 miles to make that trek just to get that letter out. It takes him 3 days. This dude travels roughly 33 miles a day on foot, up and down valleys, at high altitudes, just to send a letter. Peter Byrne did tell him to wait in the village for Tom Slick to return with messages on what to do. That individual stays there for a few more days, gets the response from Tom Slick, runs back up the mountain, another 100 miles, 3 days, and returns the message to Peter Byrne. Peter Byrne is instructed to get the hand at all costs, because it must be determined to find out what it is. So he tries to negotiate with the llamas. The llamas say, no, we won't give you the hand for religious reasons, because these are artifacts to the people and very important to them religiously. However, Peter Byrne, not swayed, does go back down the mountain. Tom Slick tells him, let's try to figure out a plan. So he returns back to London, has a nice lunch meeting with Tom Slick, Osmond Hill, other major players I won't go too much into, with the Yeti. And during that meeting, Osmond Hill brings out a brown paper bag. Now he works for the local zoo, and in that brown paper bag, he pulls out a human hand, a cadaver, and lays it on the table. Nice dinner manners, I'm sure. And they decide that maybe we can negotiate with them and do a switch. So they still have an artifact, but maybe we can do a little switcheroo. He returns back with the hand, and they do negotiate with the llamas. There's a little bit of discrepancy here. There's 3 different versions of this story. Peter Byrne will tell you that he was able to acquire some finger bones. In exchange, he would wire the human finger bones to the hand, look very similar. I'm going to give you a considerable donation to your monastery. Just let me take those couple fingers. There are 2 other stories to where maybe he had done a whole switcheroo without their knowledge, or had done a switcheroo with them after they got the llamas a little inebriated. Your choice on how you would like to go with that. I tend to believe Peter Byrne, just because there wasn't a whole lot of pushback afterwards from his little switcheroo. However, he does get some finger bones. He travels back down the mountain. Tom Slick message intercepts him and says, go to India. There'll be a man there that I want you to transfer the finger to, and he will bring it to us. Well, that man ended up being Jimmy Stewart, famous actor back in the day, his wife Gloria. He meets them at a local hotel, comes up to their room, hands off the finger bones, and Jimmy Stewart and Gloria decide to properly get it out of the country. Since it is a religious artifact and we don't want any questions, and Tom Slick thought he would be the best candidate to get it out of the country since he's a little bit of a celebrity, they probably look the other way a little bit with him, to hide said finger bones in Gloria's underwear case, or lingerie case, if you will. She was not thrilled about that idea, to say the least, but she did go along with it. They end up leaving the country, travel back to England. They get to their destination. Case is missing out of their luggage. Needless to say, they're a little worried now. They stay at a local hotel. They contact the airport, contact British Customs. No word. They stay at the hotel for several days. And eventually, the hotel lobby rings up to their room and says, "We have a gentleman here from Customs that would like to have a word with you." Probably a little worried now at this point, but they did say, "Send him up." And the young man steps in, and he has the lingerie case with him. He hands it over. They exchange some paperwork. And as Gloria is rushing him out, she notices that the case has not been opened. And so she asks and inquires, "Did you open the case? Why has it not been opened?" The British man says, young man says, "Oh, madam, certainly not. A British customs official would never open a lady's lingerie case." Needless to say, the finger bones were still in there, and they ended handing those off to Osmond Hill, our favorite guy who likes to bring human hands to dinner. Now, this is an era before DNA, but Osmond Hill is very experienced in bones primatology, and he was able to compare the bones that he received to the likely candidates. And he could not come up exactly what it was, but he believed the bones to not be human. Now, and just to kind of continue the story a little bit, I'm going to fast forward in history a little bit. Those bones ended up going missing for a little while. They were actually rediscovered. As all things do, people put things in drawers and maybe not label them super well. But eventually the bones were tested with DNA in 2011 with a BBC documentary. They were analyzed by the Royal Zoological Society of Scotland, and they determined from DNA that the finger bones were human. Unfortunately, because of a little bit of notoriety that the Pangboche hand and scalp got, there's a lot of people that become somewhat interested in seeing this roadside attraction, if you will. This is how the monastery makes money. A lot of people visit this region. They go hiking. They want to conquer Everest. You must stop at Pangboche along the way. Come pay us a couple rupees. Come see the hand, take a picture with it, take a selfie, you know, whatever you would like. And that's their business. That's how they make money. So, unfortunately, in the early 1990s, some trekker along the way ended up being able to take the Yeti scalp and hand out of the monastery. So now they have no source of income. An adventurer by the name of Mike there, you can see his picture here, found out about this story and felt sorry for the lamas and the monks that they now had no income. So he set up a website called returnthehand.com, also has a Twitter. Has not tweeted in like 8 years, however. Through some contacts, he ended up getting in contact with Weta Workshops. Anybody who's kind of a little bit of a movie buff knows that Weta is notorious for their Lord of the Rings props. And the Weta Workshops ended up making them a replacement hand and scalp that they were able to donate to the monastery so they could continue making money. I do have a video here I would like to share.
Oh, yeah, that speaker's off.
Oh, could you turn it back on?
Yeah.
Don't.
Power on. Bluetooth connected.
So this is an old insurgent.
Because of his expertise in tracking animals, he was a natural choice to lead the first scientific search for the abominable snowman. An expedition financed by Texas oil millionaire Tom Slick. Slick was killed in a plane crash, but by that time, Byrne had caught the snowman fever and has devoted his life to the search.
This is the greatest hunt that anyone could ever go on. A mysterious creature, elusive, shy, nocturnal, living in an enormous area of extremely difficult terrain, and it's a near impossible dream. To see one of these creatures would be like meeting a man stepping out of the primeval world, and a prehistoric being. It would be like reaching back into the past. This is what keeps me going. This is the spur.
So you can see the philosophy behind. As Edmund Hillary was asked why he would climb Mount Everest, because it's there. So the legend lives on. I'm going to leave you with this. The Yeti is a story of a creature uncannily close to us, deeply shrouded in mythology and religion. A relic of the past that encroaches from the wilderness into our developed world. Such folklore can reflect on our uneasy relationship to even the present-day natural world. While we see ourselves as civilized, more advanced, and different from the beasts of the forest, a wild man forever, beasts of the forest, the wild man mythology presents a shadowy remnant of our former uncivilized self. A wild man forever just outside our doors, threatening to come inside, constantly raising the bar on discussion, self-exploration, and testing our understanding of science itself. As a reminder, legends alone don't leave footprints. Thank you. You all now have your Yeti patches.